Hello, horror fans, and welcome to the Script to Screen podcast, where we delve into the spine tingling world of horror cinema. Each week, we look at the scariest scenes, unmask the deeper meanings behind your favourite horror films, and explore the psychology of fear that keeps us coming back for more.
From script analysis to scene breakdowns, we'll be dissecting your favorite horror movies to see just what makes them tick. So whether you're a seasoned horror aficionado or just starting to explore the genre, join us as we unravel the spine-tingling stories that haunt the silver screen.
I'm Will.
And I am Lee.
So how you doing, Lee? It's good to see you. How's things?
Yeah, not bad, mate. Not bad. Not bad. How's you been?
Yeah, not too bad. Not too bad at all. Have you watched anything interesting lately?
Let's see. Oh, yeah, I revisited a classic from my childhood this week in the 1980 Jeffrey Bloom horror Blood Beach, which has a fantastic tagline that totally rips on Jaws 2. Just when you thought it was safe to go back in the water, you can't get to it.
That's fantastic. I'd say if anyone else had referred to Blood Beach as a childhood classic, I'd be somewhat alarmed, Lee.
Fair. That's fair. What else? Oh, I also checked out the 2006 Norwegian slasher Cold Prey and its sequel, both of which play kind of like a Friday the 13th in the snow. Which, oh, incidentally, if you haven't seen them, check out the awesome fan film series Never Hike Alone.
Okay, so I've not heard of those, but I have to say, Lee, these fan films lately, they've evolved into something that really, it kind of often rivals the official studios, you know?
Ah, for sure, brother, for sure. I mean, I was blown away by just how good it was. But anyway, what's been on your screen this week?
Well, a couple of things. This week I went to the cinema and saw a rerun of Master and Commander, which I'm a huge fan of, and it was great to see on the big screen. It's really a film that I think you should get to see in the cinema if you ever have the chance. Huge fan of Peter Weir as well, so that was fun to watch. But I think I mentioned to you before as well, I also watched Sidney Lumet's The Offense, which was absolutely fantastic. And that
Hmm.
was Sean Connery playing a grizzled English cop. It's all set in England. And it's really just a tour de force, both directorially and from Sean Connery. So that was great.
Yeah, that's kind of struck a bell with me. I'm keeping an eye out for that one because I quite like to I'd quite like to see that. I think because I've never even heard of it until you brought it up. Tell you what, I did see this morning as well, which looks really really cool. It's the teaser trailer for the new Welcome to Derry series
Oh,
based on
okay.
it. Yeah, I think it's got like the same director, and I think Bill Skarsgård is coming back as Pennywise. So I'm
Fantastic.
really really psyched for that. That's going to be a good one.
That sounds amazing, dude.
I've got fingers crossed for that one. It's coming to HBO Max as it's now Max is now HBO Max again, or it will be HBO
Okay.
Max again. All
Right.
very confusing. So anyway, what is strapped on the table for dissection this week?
Well, strapped to the table may be a surprisingly accurate analogy there, Lee, as this week we are taking a deep dive into the 1985 cult classic Re-Animator.
Oh, hell yeah, dude.
Hell yeah, indeed. So, directed by Stuart Gordon and released October 18th, 1985, on a budget of around $900,000, Reanimator would go on to rake in just over 2 million at the box office. And while it didn't set the cinematic world on fire at the time, it has since gone on to bask in the glory of a beloved cult status.
Rightly so. We'll be comparing the film to a draft of the script dated November 25th, 1984, and written by Stuart Gordon, Dennis Paoli, and William J. Norris. Now, this version of the script weighs in at a respectable 108 pages, and as always, we are looking at these scripts purely for educational purposes, and all rights remain with their respective owners. And it's worth specifying here also that I will be comparing the script to the extended cut of the film, which runs for about an hour and 45 minutes, as opposed to the theatrical version, which is about 20 minutes shorter.
Nice. So, what made you choose this script for Dissection, Lee?
Well, first of all, Re-Animator is based on the H.P. Lovecraft classic story Herbert West Re-Animator, which was originally written over a century ago between October 1921 and June 1922 and released in Homebrew magazine. So I thought it would be interesting to kind of compare the original story with how it's been adapted for modern audiences.
Awesome. So, for any of our listeners who may not be familiar with the name, could you give us a brief rundown of who H.P. Lovecraft was and what he wrote?
Oh man, okie dokie. So this is one hell of a rabbit hole that I highly suggest any writers of horror or sci-fi take the time to really deep dive into. But for brevity's sake, I will offer a very brief summary here. So, Howard Phillips Lovecraft was born in 1890. He was an American writer, best known for his influential contributions to the horror genre, particularly what's now known as kind of cosmic horror. His stories often explore the insignificance of humanity in the face of incomprehensible ancient deities such as mighty Cthulhu, Nyarlathotep, and Shub-Niggurath. Oh, that's a mouthful. His most famous stories include At the Mountains of Madness, The Shadow over Innsmouth, and The Call of Cthulhu. With Lovecraft, I mean, his work continues to be studied, enjoyed, and expanded upon to this day, but he never really experienced great recognition during his lifetime and passed away in 1937. But the majority of his work now exists in the public domain and has pretty much taken on a life of its own in books, movies, and video games.
Yeah, surprising there aren't more of his works adapted.
I mean, there are a fair few movies based off of his work. I know, for example, Guillermo del Toro has been trying to get a Mountains of Madness adaptation off the ground for years now, even having some test footage created, which can be found online if you Google it. I personally would love to see an Innsmouth limited series fully entrenched in the time period, but obviously rewritten a little with modern sensibilities included.
Yeah, okay. So, what do you mean by modern sensibilities, Lee?
Yeah, unfortunately, Lovecraft was not to beat around the bush, kind of racist as fuck. So most, if not all, of his work can't and shouldn't be adapted at face value.
Yeah, it's a bit of an old dilemma, right? It's just separating the art from the artist.
Indeed. I mean, it's something you and I have struggled with in the past. I mean, for example, I know we'd love to do an episode on Jeepers Creepers, but if we do, it's something we're going to have to tackle very delicately due to the history of its writer director.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I mean, it's a tough call to make sometimes. And I know for myself, like I do struggle with the works of Polanski and Woody Allen all the time. And most recently, obviously, Neil Gaiman. But I have to ask, what makes Reanimator okay in that respect, Lee? So, in other words, what gives it a seemingly free pass for us?
Yeah, well, and this is a view I share for most situations like this. It takes more than one person to make a film. It takes hundreds, if not thousands, of people, and they should not have their work shunned through the actions of one individual. But also in Lovecraft's case, I mean, the guy has been dead for almost a century now. He's not profiting from this, as it's a very loose adaptation set in the 1980s. And finally, and most importantly, there are no racial elements at play here in the film whatsoever.
Yeah, cool. Okay, I'd say that's pretty fair reason there, Lee. So, what else?
Okay, so this is also a great example of the often dubbed splattercore subgenre.
Yeah, so explain for any of our listeners unfamiliar with splattercore, what's that all about, Lee?
But it basically refers to a film that kind of sets out to shock the viewers into kind of granting it cult-like notoriety. Films like Brain Dead, Evil Dead, etc. I mean, there is some stuff in here that, especially on paper, should sound absolutely horrifying. But Reanimator manages to remain a pretty fun blast all the way through until the credits roll.
Yeah. Well, I'm a huge fan of Brain Dead and Bad Taste, and obviously the Evil Dead films. I'm a huge fan of those as well. So I was, really looking forward to this one.
Mate, just wait until I track down the Terrifier scripts and you have to watch those bad boys.
Oh, I have to tell you, Lee, I'm not really looking forward to those, to be honest. That that may tip me over into the unenjoyable. Anyway, as Lee said, we're going to be looking at how the adaptation here differs from the source material, how it was written with a modern audience in mind, and how the film exploits the splattercore subgenre.
Yep, that's the one.
Alrighty then, without further delay, let's take a deep dive into Reanimator. When obsessive medical student Herbert West concocts a serum that brings the dead back to life, he and his reluctant roommate Dan Kane plunge into a nightmarish world of reanimated corpses, unethical experiments, and escalating madness. As their creations grow more uncontrollable and a sinister professor uncovers their secret, West's obsession spirals into a nightmare that threatens to claim everything Dan holds dear.
And let me jump in quickly before we even get started, because there's a really interesting little detail on the title page that I think is worth touching on. The cover page lists the script as written by Gordon, Paoli, and Norris, but then underneath lists the dialogue as being written by Paoli and Norris. And I've never seen that on a script before.
Yeah, I can't say I've really seen that either, to be honest. So, have you got any ideas why, Lee?
Well, I did a little research on the matter, and it turns out that production of Re-Animator was treated very much like a stage production, with the dialogue constantly evolving through rehearsals and input from the actors. Gordon spoke in interviews about the separation between structure and spoken words, a technique he brought from his background in theatre and then applied to the production itself.
Okay, so yeah, I'm fairly familiar with this. So it basically means that the structure, i.e., the plot, character arcs, major events, etc., are developed separately from the dialogue, by which I mean the actual words the characters say, tone, and dialect, etc. So this is a technique that a lot of screenwriters use today, certainly something that I've used, and I know you have as well, Lee, which works especially well with collaborations and the practice of using multiple passes on your rewrites.
Yeah, that was a game changer for me, focusing each rewrite on a specific aspect of the script. I mean, do you want to elaborate on that for anyone who's may not be aware of the practice?
Yeah, absolutely. So, focused rewrites, as I'm sure most of you know, can be as wide or as narrow in scope as required. So, for example, you could do a rewrite focusing on just the dialogue, or you could really focus in on a certain character and their dialect, give them an accent or a favorite saying that comes up often. I know I've certainly done sort of focus rewrites based around the theme. The basic idea is that rather than rewriting the whole script in one go, you pick out one particular aspect of the text that you want to enhance at a time. Anyway, Lee, we're already zooming off course and we haven't even started the film yet. So come on, let's focus.
Oh, you're right. You're right, as always. Back to the task at hand.
Okay, so we open inside a medical university in Zurich. An official and two guards make their way through the winding corridors towards a nervous nurse. The sounds of someone in distress grow louder. The official pounds at the door, demanding entry from Dr. Gruber and Mr. West. When neither respond and the sounds of a struggle intensify, the guards break down the door. They find the young Herbert West, played by the absolutely fantastic Jeffrey Combs, crouched over the convulsing Dr. Gruber. They pull West away, but the screaming Gruber rises up. The pressure in his head grows until the wailing man's eyeballs explode and he drops deadly. The, the official exclaims that West killed the man, to which West replies, "No, I did not. I gave him life." And roll opening credits. Yeah. And I just have to point out at this point, Lee, oh, the Hitchcockian influence on the title sequence here. So it's so much like Soul Bass and the visuals and the psycho inspired theme music. Absolutely fantastic.
So, I mean, it is a great opener, like right in there with a pretty sweet face punch and a brilliant introduction to our co-protagonist, Herbert West. And incidentally, this whole opening scene is actually missing from the script.
Yeah. So, how does this little opener help define West's character?
Well, from the moment the guards drag him away from Gruber, all West cares about is his experiment. He's yelling about his notes and his data, and when Gruber does blow his top, West expresses no guilt or remorse for his passing. Instead, he laments administering the wrong dosage and praises himself for, as you said, giving the man life.
Yeah, it's really reminiscent of Evil Dead with the spouting blood covering the screaming nurse. Comes close to painting West in an antagonistic light, I think, as well.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with West is that he's a man driven entirely by his own hubris. He's absolutely the hero in his own mind, but views his goals as so lofty that almost any action is justified in order to achieve them.
Yeah, going to be hard to root for a guy like that, Lee.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Which is why we are next introduced to.
Dan Kane, played by Bruce Abbott, a med student administering CPR to a patient. The attending doctor zaps the woman with a defibrillator before calling time. Dan refuses to give up and continues the CPR to no avail, unfortunately. But the unimpressed doctor informs Dan that he needs to know when to stop and tasks him with delivering the fresh corpse to the morgue. So it seems like in Dan, we have a protagonist that we can really root for now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we get a save the cat moment the moment we meet him, and yet there's a very subtle similarity between his introduction and West's.
Very interestingly, go on.
Okay, so besides the similar age and professions, when we meet each man, he is trying against scientific advice to beat death. That's no accident. I mean, these guys are basically two sides of the same coin, which is why they will find themselves drawn together in the near future.
Yeah, it's actually quite brilliant, isn't it?
Yeah, I think this film is going to pleasantly surprise people. I mean, in the script, this scene is a little longer, with Dan having to cut off the patient's clothes and suffering through a last gasp jump scare before heading off to the morgue.
Yeah. So after exiting the elevator and sharing some banter with Mace, the morgue security guard, Dan wheels the body inside. Quick thought, why does the morgue have its own security guard posted outside, Lee? I mean, like the guy says, nobody wants in and nobody's getting out.
Yeah. Under normal circumstances, I think that'd be true. But I mean, this is a horror movie, my friend. And in this particular movie, the morgue is going to prove to be a place of great value to our protagonists.
So can't it just be an all-you-can-eat buffet?
Beautifully put, but yes, there has to be some obstacle to make accessing it difficult in the near future.
Absolutely. So inside the morgue, it's a full house with bodies galore. After dropping off his former patient, Dan takes a moment to watch the sinister Dr. Hill perform a laser lobotomy on a corpse. Hill is played wonderfully by the late David Gale. Now, young Dan is startled from his observation by Dean Halsey, who is giving a tour of the facility to one Herbert West.
Yeah, so if we hadn't had that earlier pre-credit stinger, this would be our first introduction to West, and we'd have lost that great parallel I was talking about a minute ago.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Dean introduces West to Dr. Hill, who seems a little unnerved when it's mentioned that West studied under Dr. Hans Gruber. Wait a second, Lee. Hans Gruber?
I know, right?
Please tell me Die Hard named the character after this movie.
It's doubtful. I mean, Die Hard was based off of a book called Nothing Lasts Forever, the villain in which was one Anton Gruber. As Hans is a very popular name, I'd imagine they simply updated it to go with the times. But who knows? Maybe there is a secret Re-Animator fan amongst the Die Hard crew.
Yeah, maybe that'd be fantastic, wouldn't it?
It would.
Anyway, back to the scene, and West and the Hill share some brilliant verbal sparring. West clearly thinks little of the man, and Hill is not impressed by the young intern's attitude. The Dean invites Hill to dinner and agrees to sponsor Dan for an important fellowship.
Man, this scene is an absolute masterwork. Check out this excerpt.
Dan holds out his hand. Dan, what are you researching? West does not offer his hand. West, death. At this point, Dr. Hill turns to them, taking off his surgical cap and mask. He speaks to Halsey. Hill, hello, Alan. We don't usually see you down here anymore. Halsey, I was giving our newest student, Herbert West here, the not-so-grand tour. This should interest you, Carl. He worked with Hans Gruber. Hill's face shows interest, but also darkens slightly. West simply stares. Halsey, Mr. West, this is our eminent brain researcher and grant machine, Dr. Carl Hill. He'll be teaching neurology to your year. West, I know your work, Dr. Hill, quite well. Hill smiles. West, your theory on the location of the will in the brain is interesting, though derivative from Dr. Gruber's research in the early 70s. So derivative that in Europe it's considered plagiarized. Hill's smile disappears. West, and your support of the 12-minute limit on life of the brain stem after death. Hill, 6 to 12 minutes, Mr. West. West. Herbert West. Frankly, Dr. Hill, your work on brain death is outdated. Hill throws Halsey an angry look. Halsey is embarrassed. Okay, so what is it about this scene that warrants such high praise, Lee?
Oh man, this scene is just literally packed with little character moments and nuances. So first up, when Dan offers West his hand, only for West to completely ignore it. I mean, he barely registers Dan at this point because in his eyes, Dan is beneath him. And in West's eyes, if you are no use to him, then you are basically just a waste of his time. And then we get his introduction to Hill. I mean, the minute Gruber's name is mentioned, Hill has a spark of unease, and then West just tears into him, accusing him of stealing his old mentor's research. And Hill retaliates by purposely forgetting West's name, which is a slight that West reciprocates a moment later. It's all conflict, verbal sparring, but without so much as a raised voice.
Yeah, it's absolutely fantastic, isn't it? So, with that scene in the bag, we join Dan as he pins a note to the student lounge looking for a roommate. I'm no psychic, but I can guess where this is going. He is interrupted by young Megan Halsey, played by horror royalty and genre queen Barbara Crampton. Their impromptu makeout session transitions wonderfully into the throes of passion back at Dan's apartment before they're interrupted by a cat jumping on the bed.
By jumping, you mean blatantly tossed by someone off camera.
Yeah, absolutely. Blatantly tossed. We get some expositional banter where we learn that Meg is the Dean's daughter, which is why she can't move in with him. It looks like things might heat up again when someone lobs the cat at them once more.
Oh, Rufus.
Yeah, Rufus. The cat's probably getting pretty sick of being tossed around like a stage prop.
Oh man, yeah. Speaking of cats, Lovecraft was a massive cat lover. Just never Google the name of his cat.
Okay, yeah, so I have to know now that you brought it. Oh, shit, yeah. Yeah, can't say that out loud. Man, you weren't kidding, were you?
Yeah, sadly not.
No, don't look that up, folks. Anyway, a desperate Dan dons a sheet and playfully chases Meg through the apartment to the front door, where upon opening it, they are met by none other than Herbert West, who is here about the apartment for rent. Dan gives West the tour, but the Erie exchange student is more concerned with whether or not the building has an accessible basement. Not nefarious at all, Lee.
Not
Meg,
at all.
Meg can't seem to drop enough hints that she is not keen on West, but cold, hard cash wins the daily, and Dan finds himself with a new roommate.
Yeah, all pretty much as it is on the page, and you know Dan is going to regret this decision in the not too distant future, right?
Undoubtedly. So the next morning, Dr. Hill guides a group of students, Dan and West among them, through a post mortem brain removal. He makes a point of challenging West's beliefs on brain death, which the young man responds to by loudly snapping pencils until Hill's patience is gone. The two men share a much more aggressive exchange, and it's clear that these two are building towards a pretty serious confrontation down the line.
Mr. West, I suggest you get yourself a pen. Man, I love that line so much.
It's fantastic, isn't
Like,
it? So later that evening, we join Dean Halsey, Meg, and Dr. Hill at their lavish dinner. Meg won't be drinking though, as she's off for a study date with Dan, something Hill is not happy to learn about.
yeah, I mean, he's gone full pervy lecture on us now.
And what's with the weird shots of Hill in this scene? It feels really out of place.
Well, it's alluded to and a little clearer in the script that Hill, the renowned expert on the human brain, is also a capable hypnotist of sorts. Hence his attempt to make Meg too tired to leave the house, and then his convincing of her father that Dan is a danger to her. This is something that's largely played down in the theatrical cut, but it's fully explored here in the extended version.
Awesome. So back at Dan's place, and it turns out that the two lovebirds are indeed actually studying. Surprise, surprise. Dan attempts to shift to more physical activities, but Meg quickly shuts him down. She's uneasy around West and isn't happy that he's living with her boyfriend. She believes Dan feels the same way, and even Rufus. Wait a second, Lee. Where is the invasive little feline? He's normally all over them.
Maybe somebody tossed him a little too hard.
Maybe, Lee, maybe. Meg and Dan quickly get to searching for the errant Moggy. Meg's search leads her to West's room and an open fridge where she discovers a decidedly dead Rufus. Oh no, Lee. West arrives to find Meg in his room and a confrontation ensues. Neither Dan nor Meg believe West's excuse that the cat suffocated in a jar. Totally lame excuse. But West quickly turns the situation to his favor by threatening to reveal to the Dean that Dan is sleeping with his daughter.
Surely the dean can't be that stupid as not to realize this.
Yeah, I get the feeling that it's kind of an unspoken thing that they both are probably happy to avoid discussing. We also do get this brilliant little exchange. Dan, couldn't you call or leave a note? West, I was busy pushing bodies around, as you well know. And what would a note say? Cat dead, details later. I knew you were fond of it. Meg, you killed him. I know you did. West, more empathetic. Besides, I don't like people in my room. Dan, that's enough. Cat dead, details later. I mean, it's
Oh,
classic.
that is such a Herbert West thing to say, isn't it? I mean, after this in the script, we get a nightmare scene that didn't make it into the finished film. So check this out.
Interior, autopsy room, night. Dan enters. To his surprise, West, Halsey, and Hill are there arguing. He slowly rolls the gurney. As he approaches, he hears them. Halsey, it's impossible. You'll never make me believe it. West, it's true, you old fool. You blind, decrepit old fool. You simply won't believe it. Halsey turns to Dan. Halsey, Mr. Kane. Mr. West has been telling me some shocking things about what's going on at your house. Dan, that's not true. He's lying. West, it is true, and I can prove it. Hill, well, here's your chance. Hill throws the sheet from the body on Dan's gurney. It's Meg, her skin cold and grey with death. Dan reacts as if punched in the stomach. His mouth opens, but he can't speak. He can hardly breathe. West, an excellent specimen. He produces a small bottle like those in the refrigerator in his room and fills a large hypodermic needle from it. Halsey looks on, perturbed, but relatively unmoved considering that his daughter lies dead before him. Hill smiles. Hill, do you believe this fiction, Mr. Kane? Dan struggles for breath. West injects the hypo into Meg's heart. Dan grimaces. Suddenly the body is no longer grey, but flesh-toned, almost pink. She does not move, but a slight whimper seems to come from her throat. West, aha! Her head turns, and her shoulders rise a little off the table. She whimpers again. Her head turns back the other way, and her whole body begins to writhe gently, alluringly. Her whimper breaks into a groan. Dan is fascinated. West, she's hungry for it. Soon she'll be mad for it. Her back arches off the table. Her arms rise, hands spread to Dan. Her groan takes a different shape. Meg, Dan, Dan. Halsey, and it's true. It's all true. To Dan, and it's all your fault. Dan shakes his head but is unable to speak. Suddenly the body begins to writhe more quickly, spasmodically. The groan becomes louder and louder until it's a terrible scream. West is laughing, but soon all Dan can hear is the scream. He closes his eyes and covers his ears, but the scream grows inhumanely terrifying. Fantastically. So why did this scene not make it, do you think?
A couple of reasons, I think. I mean, firstly, it's obviously a dream sequence. Like only the most gullible or inattentive of individuals would think otherwise. And secondly, it kind of gives away some events that will happen later in the film and several of the plot points. Plus, it's kind of unrealistic for Dan to kind of put two and two together at this point that the green glowing liquid is a reanimating agent just from nowhere. So, that's my opinion. What's your take on it?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think it does have some interesting foreshadowing, but possibly a bit too on the nose.
Hmm.
So later that night, Dan is wrenched from his sleep by a horrific scream. Arming himself with a baseball bat, he sets out to investigate and tracks the sound to the basement, where he bashes the door in and promptly tumbles down the stairs.
What a pillock.
Yeah, total pillock. He finds West under attack by a very much alive and thoroughly pissed off Rufus. So what follows is an absolutely brilliant scene of the two men battling a ridiculously fake looking cat. I don't know if it's intentionally meant to be this funny, but oh my God, dude, I was cracking up.
Absolute cinema right there, I tell you.
Absolute cinema. So, with Rufus dispatched for a second time, West informs Dan about his work and his process, a chemical reagent that reanimates dead tissue and brings the dead back to life. Now, Dan isn't buying it until West reanimates the poor cat yet again.
Yeah, man. And we also get this absolute banger of dialogue. Dan, God, why does it make that noise? West, birth is always painful.
Yeah. So the poor thing is in almost two pieces and flopping around when Meg pops up in the background just in time to witness this fresh horror.
It's so funny when she just kind of pops up behind them. It's like the worst timing ever.
Yeah. So Dan takes her upstairs where she reveals she snuck in to look at West's file and that he was caught doing things to Hans Gruber's corpse.
Now, there is a sentence I bet you've never uttered before.
Absolutely. So Dan is all in now, though. He tries to explain to her that Herbert West has conquered death, and West states in his defense that he was simply trying to save poor Dr. Gruber. Meg may not be convinced, but Dan agrees to speak to the Dean about West's work. Things do not go as planned, however, as the Dean, seemingly still under the control of, or at least influenced by the sinister Dr. Hill, tears into Dan, rescinds his student loan, and expels West from the university. Now, Dan attempts to explain West's reanimation serum, and this also falls on deaf ears.
Yeah, there's a few extra lines in the script where the furious Dean takes a moment to scientifically actually debunk West's work. So check this out. Dan, I've seen it, sir. You brought a dead animal. Subject, cat, back to life. Halsey, how long have the cat been dead? Dan, I don't know, a few minutes. Halsey, unless it had been dead for more than 12 minutes, any adrenaline derivative could have been produced the same result. The cat was not clinically dead, if it was dead at all. The dean also asked Dan, what have you been doing with my daughter?
Yeah, no, that's not a question he wants answered.
For sure. I mean, can you imagine? Like, well, Dean Halsey, last night she gave me a Cleveland steamer, and the night before it was a rusty trouble.
No, Lee, no, we're not doing that. Okay, so outside the dean's office, Dan finds Meg waiting. She's totally there for him, accepts his proposal of marriage, and offers to get a job to help pay his student fees. Come on, Meg, as long as he stays away from West. And speaking of the devil, Herbert looms round the corner where he has clearly been listening to their conversation. Poor Dan finds himself literally torn between the devil on one shoulder and an angel on the other.
Yeah, I mean, this is absolutely his point of no return, I think. I mean, the choice he makes here is going to have massive repercussions and change his life forever.
Absolutely. And just a shout out to Jeffrey Combs here. And throughout this whole movie, in fact, because he is so delightfully smug and self assured. It is just a joy to watch Jeffrey do this in this film. So Wes seems to know exactly what buttons to push to sway Dan to the dark side. And all his talk of curing death is enough to win Dan over.
I mean, like I said earlier, these two men are much more alike than either would care to admit.
So, would the law of curing death, global recognition, and countless riches be enough to lure you to the dark side, Lee?
Wealth, fame, and immortality all marry Barbara Crampton.
Yeah, I think I know where this is going.
Hell yeah, Barbara Crampton, all day, every day.
Well, for right or wrong, Dan sides with West on this one. He suggests they locate another animal to prove their theories, but West has bigger goals in mind.
Oh yeah. I mean, also, and I struggled between this and the reanimated cat scene, but I think I'm going to say this is the end of Act One.
Okay, so you don't sound too sure yourself on that one, Lee.
Yeah, I know, man. It just feels like way too late in the film, so I'm not too confident in that. What do you think?
Yeah, so I was thinking Dan accepting West's cash and allowing him to move in was probably the end of Act One, but that
Yeah.
may be a tad early. But as we say, I mean, these things are always pretty subjective, right? So who knows? Either way, the next thing we see is Dan pushing a suspicious looking corpse to the morgue. During Mace's hurried inspection, we spot that, of course, it is West under the tarp. Once in the morgue, after redonning his socks and shoes, West leads Dan into the corpse storage, where they select a suitable stiff and administer the reagent. Meanwhile, Meg and her father head to the morgue to stop them.
Interesting factoid for you. The corpse they've selected belongs to one Peter Kent, who was Arnold Schwarzenegger's stunt double on most of his 80s and 90s hits, including The Terminator and Predator.
Oh man, we've got to do that Predator episode at some point.
For sure, dude, for sure.
So Dean Halsey ditches a hysterical med in reception and heads down to confront Dan and West. Meanwhile, in the morgue, the corpse shows no signs of life, so West ups the dosage, but still to no effect.
There's a great bit of dialogue here. Dan, he failed. Now come on, someone will be coming any minute. West, he failed, not I.
Yeah, it's another brilliant example of West's titanic ego on display, wonderfully executed through simple dialogue here. Well, the up dosage suddenly kicks in and the corpse awakens in a panic fueled rage, attacking the two men and trashing the room as Dean Halsey arrives outside and tries to open the locked door.
And the script does a wonderful job of describing the freshly reanimated corpse. Check it out. Like a frightened beast, the corpse smashes anything it happens to touch, screaming as if in terrible pain, pushes over the body cart, sending the corpses sprawling.
Yeah, it's fantastic, isn't it? Dan manages to evade the charging cadaver, only for it to smash through the body room door and squash poor Dean Halsey like a pancake Lee.
I love the way it even jumps up and down on the door to elicit like a little squish sound effect. And it's a cool little detail that the corpse's back is purple, where all the blood has pooled after death, where he's been laying on his back.
And things go from bad to worse for the poor Dean as the rampaging corpse hoists him up, bites off two of his fingers, and proceeds to batter the old man against a wall. Dan is justifiably freaking out as he tries in vain to rescue his would be father in law. Meanwhile, West, who looks calm as ever, grabs a bone saw and drills right through the corpse's chest, finally putting the rampaging beast down. No sooner is the reanimated wrecking ball dealt with than West immediately sets to prepping the dead Dean for reanimation, much to Dan's initial horror. It doesn't take much to talk him round, though, and the two men are set for reanimation round two.
Yeah, I think Dan is circling for the Anakin Skywalker Award for easily swayed protagonists here.
It's not the Jedi way, Lee.
I mean, to be fair, Dan is clearly in shock here, a fact that's made a little bit clearer in the script.
It's just another day at the office for West, though, and he is all business, Lee. Meanwhile, back in the reception area, Meg's hapless watcher is called away on an emergency, so she takes the chance to sneak off to the morgue.
Ooh, big mistake.
Back in the morgue now, and at 17 seconds, the dead Dean opens his eyes, just as his oblivious daughter exits the nearby elevator.
Meg really does have a knack for arriving at the worst possible time, doesn't she?
She really does, doesn't she, bless her? While not quite as frenzied as the previous subject, the reanimated Dean quickly sets to choking both Dan and West until Meg's arrival sends him cowering into a corner. And in what may be the biggest I regret taking that coffee break moment of all time, the errant Mace arrives to stumble upon the biggest shit show in morgue history.
Biggest shit show in morgue history up until this point.
Oh, God, that doesn't bode well, does it? West does his best to talk them out of trouble, attempting to pin the blame purely on the demented Dean, much to Meg's dismay. It's too much for poor old Dan, and he collapses to the floor as the security guard calls the police.
I like the way West covers him with a blanket. I mean, is that a glimpse of humanity from ice cold Herbert, do you think?
Well, I think it's more his showing Dan that the tape recording of the experiment has been stashed safely in his pocket. But who knows? Perhaps West has started to form some kind of connection with his new partner in crime. Now, back at the apartment, West is elated both at the success of their experiment and the fact they have gotten away with arguable manslaughter. The mad young prodigy seems to be in some discomfort, though, as he quickly absconds to his room. Dan follows a moment later to find West struggling to fill a syringe with his reagent. And it turns out, Lee, he's been injecting himself regularly with a small dose so that he doesn't have to sleep with the crazy bastard. Dan preps the dose, and with West suffering from some serious withdrawal symptoms, he administers the injection for him.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a bond growing between these two, though. I don't know if you'd call it a friendship yet.
Yeah, I think I think more victims of circumstance, maybe. But like you said earlier, I think these two are far more similar than either would care to admit.
Yeah, there's a subtle difference in the script here, as on the page, West asks Dan to perform the ejection, whereas on the screen, Dan does it of his own accord without being asked.
Yeah, I like that Dan does it without prompting. It illustrates his more compassionate nature, I think. But with the drug administeredly, West snaps almost immediately back to his controlled, aloof self.
Man, I could so do with some reagent to help me wake up every morning.
I don't see glowing green liquid passing FDA approval anytime soon, buddy.
Ah, damn it.
Yeah. So back to the movie, and Meg watches her straight-jacketed father pace in a padded cell as she is comforted by Dr. Hill, who persuades her to sign a consent form so that he can perform exploratory brain surgery on her demented daddy. The lecherous doctor then whips out his sinister hypnotism skills to force Meg to call him Carl and to think of him as someone she can come to when she's lonely.
Ugh, what a sleazeball.
Yeah, it makes you shudder, doesn't it? The sleazeball. Thankfully, his mental manipulation is thwarted by the deranged Dean Halsey headbutting the two-way mirror and breaking Meg's trance, causing her to leave in a hurry. An enraged Dr. Hill then heads into the padded cell with some orderlies, and it's clear they do not have the demented Dean's best interests at heart.
Yeah. Funny side note, you can actually see the padded cell wobble when one of the orderlies bumps into it.
Yeah, hardly a secure environment for a murderous mental patient. A little later, in an operating room, an amazed Dr. Hill discovers that the poor Dean is in fact very much dead. However, the animated corpse must be made docile. Hence, the sinister Dr. Hill sets out with his laser scalpel to pacify his remarkable patient for good.
The little extra dialogue in the script, but otherwise we're largely on track with what's on page.
Yeah. So back at Meg's house, Dan hits the poor girl with a good news, bad news combo. The good news is that her dad isn't insane.
Yay!
The bad news is, unfortunately, that he is dead.
Oh, man, poor Meg.
Yeah, she's not having the best week, is she?
Nope, and it is going to get so much worse.
Still, Dan promises to tell Meg everything, which must be a comfort. Meanwhile, in West's basement laboratory, he is confronted by Dr. Hill, who pulls out the old hypnosis trick to compel West to share his notes. After learning of the young genius's methods, Hill announces that he will take his research and that West will become his new assistant.
I love the single tear that runs down West's cheek here. Is it at the mention of his lost mentor, Dr. Gruber, or simply the loss of control or loss of his work that triggers it, do you think?
Yeah, it's such a great touch. I think somewhere in his subconscious, West knows his discoveries are going to be stolen from him at this moment.
Yeah. Also, this scene is not present in the script. Instead, we head straight into this one.
Back at Meg's, Dan promises to turn himself in. He just needs proof, and to get that, he has to prove to the world that Meg's father is truly dead. The two of them break into Dr. Hill's office, where the Dean huddles motionless in the corner of his cell. Dan fears that Hill may find out the truth about what has happened.
And it's at this point in the script that we get the entire scene of West and Hill in the basement.
Yeah, so back on the screen, and Hill is compelling West to demonstrate his reagent in action. West is no weak minded sycophant, however, and while Hill is distracted, he clocks him with a shovel and then decapitates the despicable doctor for good measure.
In the script, this scene cuts to Meg and Dan knocking over the medical head model display in Hill's office, which I think would have made such a great scene transition. And there's also a delightfully dark moment where West tries in vain to stand Hill's severed head upright in a specimen tray before eventually impaling it on a notary spike. He runs out of patience.
That's so funny, isn't it? So, never one to let a scientific opportunity pass him by, West injects both the severed head and torso with a dose of reagent before sitting back to await the results. Hill's head awakens and curses West before his headless corpse looms behind the distracted young man and strikes him unconscious. Now, back in Hill's office, Dan discovers a file folder dedicated to Megan so sinisterly
Yeah.
and including some unauthorized Polaroids and a lock of her hair. Oh, this lecherous old fucker. I mean, what the fuck? If that wasn't bad enough, they learn that Meg's dear old daddy has been lobotomized.
Oh, poor Meg.
Oh, indeed, dude. So Dan returns home to discover West in a state of despair. It seems Hill has escaped with his serum, Lee. Revelations abound on either side as Dan learns that Hill was/is dead, and West is delighted to hear about Hill's unhealthy obsession with Meg. On the positive side, though, the two men are convinced that Hill will come after them, and all they have to do is wait.
Yeah, hardly the best plan, I feel.
No, it's a completely shit plan, Lee. Somehow, the headless Hill has managed to return to his office and tops up his detached cranium with a fresh dose of reagent before soaking it in some chilled blood.
I love the frustration on Hill's face as he tries to guide his torso to the fridge, only for it to kind of lumber around the room like a bull in a china shop.
It looks like Dan and West are in for a long wait at this point. Dan paces nervously while his unhinged companion amuses himself reading a book on surgical errors. There's nothing sinister about that. The detached Dr. Hill, meanwhile, compels the lobotomized Dean Halsey to obey him, just as Dan realizes that Hill's obsession will compel him to go after Meg, not them.
So,
Oh no! Hill, dressed in surgical scrubs, wearing a fake head from his office and carrying his actual head in a duffel bag, manages to sneak past Mace. I mean, what the fuck? And the morgue security guard, who you guessed it, takes the opportunity for another fucking coffee break, Lee.
yeah, man, this guy has like the easiest job on the planet.
He does seem to be coasting through his career at this moment. There's no doubt about that. Also, I have a question, Lee.
Okay.
So why didn't Hill just stick his own head on his torso rather than using the obviously fake one and stuffing his actual head in a bag?
That is a very good question. And this is actually explained a little later in the script, as Hill mentions that he used the fake head as his own one kept falling off.
Ah, okay. Well, that answers that one easy enough. Dr. Hill sets himself up in the morgue and retrieves a fresh corpse from the body room. Dan, meanwhile, arrives at Meg's to find her safe and sound, which is nice. After some delightfully cringy dialogue, it looks like the two lovebirds will finally reconcile when
Boom!
the zombified Dean smashes through the door, knocks Dan senseless, and makes off with a screaming Meg.
Start of Act 3.
Yeah, break into Act 3. It doesn't take long for them to arrive at the morgue where Hill is preemptively lobotomizing corpses. I mean, this guy. Hill's severed head watches lustily as the Dean and Hill's reanimated torso strip the young woman and restrain her to an autopsy table.
Well, we were looking for shock value.
It's definitely that, Lee. Back at Meg's, and West wakes Dan before the two of them rush to the hospital to confront their disturbed nemesis. Meanwhile, poor Meg wakes up to find things have gone from bad to worse, as everywhere she looks, a new horror awaits.
It's just one thing for another for poor Meg, as her cognition goes from her being tied up to being naked, to the guy stood over her, to the severed head laughing at her, and finally to the headless corpse looming over the table.
Oh man, it's a lot to take in for sure. And it's gonna lead to one hell of a therapy bill, I think, later down the line. Provided, of course, she ever makes it out in one piece, Lee. But things go from bad to nightmarishly horrific as Hill's head takes a tour of Meg's exposed flesh, ending with, and I know what you're going to say next, I can practically feel it in my bones, Lee, a final stop between Meg's thighs.
You're expecting me to make a head joke, aren't you?
I am Lee.
Echo, echo, echo.
Oh, dear Lee. Come on. Thankfully, the day is saved as West arrives and berates the disgusting doctor.
He is definitely a cunning linguist.
Lee, behave yourself. On screen, we switch to a wider shot that reveals several important details as West and Hill face off. Firstly, we see Dan sneak into the room in the background, and secondly, the room is full of trolleyed corpses from the body room.
We also get a great little line from West here. West, you'll never get credit for my discovery now. Who's going to believe a talking head? Get a job in a sideshow. Hill, soon a surgeon here under my control and direction will repair your carnage, Mr. West. Then I will reveal myself to the world. It also proves to be somewhat prophetic, as we'll learn when I talk sequels later, and the reply from Hill, which is missing from the film, does explain somewhat how Hill plans to take credit for West's work in the future, being as he is now a headless corpse.
Okay. West and Hill continue their verbal face-off. West assures the headless Hill that he has a plan to defeat him, at which point Hill replies, "So do I," as every corpse in the room lurches to unlife.
Ambush!
Ambush! Dan and Meg are swarmed by the undead as West attempts to sneak up behind Hill with a syringe of reagent.
I love this shot where Hill just kind of lifts his severed head over his shoulders to catch West in the act of sneaking up behind him and subdue him.
With West restrained, Hill begins the laser lobotomy procedure on him.
Yeah, it's really cool how Wes is too proud to scream and just kind of fixes Hill with a death stare as the laser starts to burn into his skull. I mean, in the script, Hill elaborates a little here on his mesmerism skills and how West's will is too strong to be controlled. However, his new lobotomy laser allows him to turn both the living and the dead into mindless supplicants.
Just when all seems lost, though, Meg's terrified screams break through her father's trance, and he leaps to his daughter's defense before attacking Hill's headless corpse and throwing the room into utter chaos. The reinvigorated Halsey tosses Hill's corpse out of the morgue and into the returning mace before dashing back into the room and attacking Hill's head. Our three heroes manage to free themselves long enough for West to retrieve two syringes of reagent. It seems he really does have a plan. Overdose! He sticks Hill's body with the lethal dosage just as Halsey pops Hill's head like a grape and tosses it into the hallway, causing the flustered security guard to flee for his life. With Hill's mental influence gone, the reanimated corpses rampage mindlessly as West studies Hill's flailing torso for any potential reaction.
He is still all about his work, isn't he?
He, his curiosity proves to be his undoing, though, as Hill's corpse explodes with unnatural life, the large intestine wrapping around Herbert's head and dragging him down. Dan tries in vain to save him, but the room is filling with chemical fumes, and he and Meg are forced to watch Dean Halsey torn to pieces before they're able to make their escape. With his dying breath, West tosses Dan his life's work before being seemingly dragged to his demise.
And even in death, he's all about his life's work.
Yeah, he certainly is. So Dan and Meg fight their way to the elevator, but a rampaging corpse forces its way in as the doors are closing and attacks Meg. Dan grabs a fire axe and lops off the attacking corpse's arm, which continues to throttle the girl even after being chopped off. Meg is not looking good as Dan carries her from the elevator into the emergency ward.
Yeah, I feel I have to point out the raw diehardishness of Dan, blood-soaked and clad in a white vest here.
Yeah, very John McClane. Dan and the doctors do their best, but it seems Meg has expired. Lee. Oh no!
Oh,
The doctors leave Dan with Meg to grieve, but Dan has a desperate plan. He heads to Herbert's bag and preps a syringe of reagent, tells Meg he loves her, and the screen freezes.
it's a really cool final shot as everything goes black save for the glowing syringe, which then drains as it's injected into Meg's neck. A moment later, we get a horrifying scream before the credits roll. I feel compelled to point out the similarities between the first and last times we see Dan. Like, once again, he's in the trying desperately to save a woman who shouldn't be saved. And it seems that he still hasn't learned when to stop. So, come on then, bud. What did you think?
Oh, dude. Well, I have to tell you, Lee, I had a total blast watching this one. I mean, this film is so silly and it takes such delight in being comically gory that it ends up, I mean, it's just hilariously daft. I think the acting is wonderfully hammy, and I think you can forgive it some of its failings because this isn't supposed to be anything other than just outrageous and entertaining fun.
Absolutely. I mean, I think this movie can best be summed up in one word, which is gratuitous, be it gore, nudity, or violence. And yet it retains a strong cult appeal to this day, not the least, I think, due to Coombs' iconic role as Herbert West.
Yeah, man. I mean, gratuitous is right. I think. I think the movie, as you said many times, it tries to push the limits of taste. In some scenes, Meg's assault, especially, I think, goes a touch too far and is probably in slightly poor taste.
And as shocking and disturbing as that scene may be, the story behind its filming is surprisingly wholesome.
Yeah, and I've read a lot about Stuart Gordon, so I can imagine he was very sort of conscientious here.
Yeah, it's been stated in interviews with Crampton that director Stuart Gordon was so conscious of her vulnerability in this scene that he went out of his way to accommodate her, whether it be by closing off the set, allowing her input on the shots, and basically allowing her to veto anything that she wasn't comfortable with. But I mean, despite this, it was still a difficult scene for her to shoot, but it could have been so much worse. I mean, one could argue that it was worse for David Gale, who played Dr. Hill in that scene.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to believe, but tell us more, Lee.
Well, it's been reported that Gale was deeply embarrassed while filming the scene, and to make matters worse, multiple sources state that Gale's wife was so appalled by what she saw during the premiere that she divorced him soon after.
Damn. Damn it. I mean, talk about suffering for your art.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there were other factors that played a part in her decision, but still.
Yeah. Okay then, bud. Let's break this baby down. Now, as always, we'll begin the breakdown with a retrospective look at our reasons for choosing the film. So, first of all, how does the film compare to the source material, Lee?
Well, tonally, the original serial is a lot more serious. I mean, and there is no Meg or Dr. Hill, and even Dan's character is reduced to that of an unnamed narrator. Obviously, the time period is the biggest difference. Not only the updated setting seen in the film, but in the original work, Wes and his partner in crime spend years together, and their misadventures range from full-on grave robbing to using fresh corpses in the middle of a war zone.
Hmm. Yeah, okay. So I'm not familiar with the original work this is based on, but I can imagine it being far more serious affair.
Yeah.
So what about the whole splattercore aspect?
So the main points of this particular subgenre are excessive gore, dark humor, and violence with a dollop of campiness thrown in for good measure. I mean, West brings the humor and camp in bucket loads, and the constant gruesome reanimations add both gore and violence into an already volatile mix. I mean, Re-Animator further ups the ante by chucking in a shed load of gratuitous nudity and some absurd, often laugh out loud moments, such as Dr. Hill sneaking into the morgue and Rufus's undead rampage.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, man. So let's take a look at our characters. So are there any introductions or moments that stood out to you as particularly effective or memorable?
For me, it's probably Dan's introduction. Not so much the words used to describe him, but rather his actions that speak volumes to his character. Let me read it for you. Harrod. Mr. Kane, we have done all that can be done for this woman. She has not responded. She's done. Dan. Not as long as I keep doing this. He keeps going, but he is getting tired. Harrod watches him in stony silence until Dan finally stops. Harrod quickly switches off the monitor. The two nurses immediately begin disconnecting tubes and throwing them onto the patient, turning off oxygen, etc. Harrod. Kane, your optimism is touching, but a waste of time. A good doctor knows when to stop. And there are so many delightful little character moments for Herbert West. One of my favorites being this, which happens just after they've killed or killed again the reanimated Rufus. Dan. How? West's heaving but soundless laughter stops and his torso straightens, his head erect, as if he were about to be crowned. Then suddenly he points beyond Dan. West, look out! Dan jumps in fear and looks back at the cat, but its body still lies in a lifeless heap. He glares back at West, who shakes in throes of silent laughter. How about yourself?
Yeah, man. So, I mean, reading the script, I thought it was interesting. The writers generally, like as you've alluded to just there, decided to introduce characters through their actions rather than a descriptive passage that we've seen kind of elsewhere in the previous scripts that we've looked at.
Yeah.
So we touched on earlier when West is kind of introduced in the film. Obviously, he's introduced in the first scene, but in the script, that's not where he's initially kind of introduced. So when West is introduced in the script, he speaks a line and is then introduced literally just by his name. So I'll read that for you now. Halsey. Sorry, Daniel. I didn't mean to frighten you. Dan. Oh, no, you didn't, Dean Halsey. I just didn't know there was anybody there. West, off screen. You mean anybody else? Dan turns to look at the speaker who steps up beside Halsey. It is Herbert West. Halsey. Daniel, this is Herbert West. He'll be joining you in the third year. He was doing independent research in Switzerland with Dr. Gruber shortly before he died. Mr. West, this is Daniel Kane, one of Miskatonic Medical's best young hopes for the future of medicine. Dan holds out his hand. Dan, what were you researching? West does not offer his hand. West, death. So as you can see there, Lee, I mean, there's no character description or anything there really that tells us how West looks. Halsey gives us some info on West's backstory, but as the scene develops, it's West's actions, I think, that give us further clues as to his character.
Hmm.
He's clearly confident. He's obviously antagonistic towards Hill. And then at the end of the scene, we get this delightful little character beat. They turn and stroll down a row of bodies. Dan idly watches as he checks the chart of the corpse he delivered. Then he watches with more interest as he notices West tapping each of the bodies as he passes them. So I think this is a really great tip for writers, Lee. So obviously look is important and a description is good, but also when you're introducing characters, have them doing something and let those actions show the audience who the character is.
Yeah.
So before we break down the scarology, did you have a scariest moment?
I think for me, the most disturbing moment is when the two men reanimate poor Rufus again. I mean, I know it's a really bad special effect, but the idea of watching a beloved pet suffer in front of you is something that really kind of hits home for me. I mean, I've been in a similar situation with cats before, minus the reanimation aspect, and it's not good, man.
Yeah, man, as an animal lover, that was pretty rough for me as well, Lee. I think for me, though, the most disturbing part of this movie is Meg being assaulted by the decapitated head of Dr. Hill. I'm not sure I actually saw the worst version of this scene available as well, because I think I saw the theatrical cut of the film. I certainly
Hmm.
didn't see the extended cut.
Yeah.
But even what I saw, dude, in the version that I saw, really did push the boundaries of good taste, and it was pretty disturbing, man. Okay, so that aside, let's talk about scarology. So first of all, yes or no answer, does the film more or less conform to the 10-minute rule?
Not until the final act, no. However, the theatrical version, I would imagine, does comply much more closely to the 10-minute rule.
Okay, so break it down for us.
Okay, so we open with our face punch of Dr. Gruber's exploding eyeballs at 1 minute 30. But then it's 29 minutes before we get another scare with Meg discovering Rufus in the fridge at 30 minutes and 30 seconds.
Yeah, that's a hell of a wait.
Yeah, man. I mean, to be fair, you do get some leeway in the first act, and also the time between these 2 points is considerably shorter in the theatrical cut. Plus, there are some creepy shots scattered throughout, especially of Dr. Hill and his eerie hypnosis face, but nothing I would really class as scary. Rufus returns again at 34 and a half minutes, where Dan and West must battle the undead feline, and yet again at 39 minutes, where West reanimates the poor thing again. And then we're into Act Two and the rampaging corpse at 51 minutes, followed by the reanimated Dean shortly after at 56 minutes and 20. Now, then it's a little wait for our next shot of adrenaline, which is when West decapitates Dr. Hill at 1 hour, 13 minutes, 15 seconds, and then reanimates his dismembered parts at 1 hour and 15 minutes, right before our final fright of Act Two, that being the dead Dean's abduction of Megan at 1 hour, 26 minutes, and 30 seconds. And then the frights come thick and fast in our final act, starting with Meg's disrobing at 1 hour 28 minutes, followed quickly by her assault from Hill around 1 hour and 29 minutes. Shortly after which West's arrival triggers Hill's ambush just before the 1 hour 32-minute mark. And the onslaught continues with Halsey crushing Hill's head at 1 hour 34 minutes and 40 seconds, and West creating an overdosed abomination at 1 hour 35 minutes and 40 seconds. And then minutes later, Meg's father is torn to pieces in front of her at 1 hour 36 and 25, and Meg herself is killed a minute later. Our final scare is the unnerving moment Dan attempts to reanimate Meg at 1 hour 41 minutes and 20 seconds.
Okay, so let's break down those acts for you. So in total, we have 17 major scares in a 105-minute film, and that averages out about one scare every 6 minutes and 17 seconds. But that's nothing like what the scarology presents us with. So in Act One, we have just four scares, which, depending on where you agree the act break lies, barely leaves us with enough for one scare every 10 minutes. It's a slow burn, which again is rectified in the theatrical cut. Then we break into Act Two, which has a further five scares, closer together and longer in duration. And finally, Act Three, the shortest act by far, yet packed with eight definitive scares, although one could argue that most of the final sequence is one continuous fright scene, I would say. So, what we basically have here is a slow boil, which picks up pace as the acts get shorter, and the number of scares increase in pace and number.
Fantastic. Do you have any thoughts on the themes at work here?
Yeah, well, I thought this didn't really deal, as we've seen with so many of the horror films that we've looked at. I mean, this didn't really deal with the fear of death kind of thematic that we're used to, because no one really seems to kind of fear death for me. To me, if we're looking at our kind of Parker themes, this felt much more like a desire for validation or the morality of individuals kind of thematic. So, a few examples of this playing out on the page. Here, Hill talks about his desire for validation specifically. The shining in his eyes is steady and bright. West sits quietly on his stool. Hill, you will be my research assistant, and we will work very closely together. After a year or so, I will reveal my new serum to an utterly astonished world. I will be placed in the pantheon of science. They will retire the Nobel Prize for Medicine in my name. You, as my assistant, will be famous. That leaves only Mr. Kane. And here Hill talks about Dan and his morality. Hill: I don't know, Alan. Perhaps. But I'm wondering if he's morally fit to be a doctor. So certainly, I think, West and Hall are both seeking for their work to be held in some esteem or for their discoveries to be recognized in some way. And all the characters are making choices which are, pretty, maybe except for Meg, they're all making choices which are pretty morally, questionable.
Mm.
Um, Dan seems to have a fairly kind of weak personality for me, for the most part, and is swayed by West really easily. And I felt this also hinted at a need for validation in some sense on his part.
Yeah.
But more broadly, I think, this is pretty clearly a film about obsession, and a desire for power, and how these two things corrupt people. And I think this is all hinted at pretty clearly in the script, both in the actions of both our protagonists, but also in the dialogue. So I've got a few examples here.
Mm.
West: he wants credit, both of him. Giggles: we stand between him and his, mocking, obsessive desire. Dan: obsessive desire? West: besides, he hates me. He's jealous. And we also get this from Hill. Hill: history pretends to honor discoveries, men of ideas, but what it really respects is power. So, all that said, Lee, I think there is actually an idea which emerges towards the end of the screenplay, certainly, which suggests this may be a film about the power of love. And that when all is said and done, I think, love is the real conqueror of death. So, this excerpt from when Meg seems to be able to cut through her dead father's trance like stupor. The trance is replaced by recognition in Halsey's eyes. Love overcomes the mesmeric power of Hill. Halsey grabs his head and wails like a soul in torment. For a moment, all is silent. Then he turns, sees Hill at the autopsy table, and wailing again, rushes towards him.
Nice.
So, yeah, man, what about you? What do you think?
Well, I was originally set on, the traditional horror fear of death, but like you said, I mean, if you're looking at West as the protagonist, desire for order could very well be his driving force, as he himself clearly does not fear death. Rather, he sees it as an obstacle to be overcome. I mean, in his final moments, West chooses to save his work rather than save himself.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, dude. And I was thinking as well, somewhere, I was thinking Desire for Order. Is this about that as well?
Mm. Yeah.
But yeah, it's a cool shout. So, what, if anything, do you think you've learned from the Scriptly?
For me, I took a couple of things from this script. I mean, first of all, I love the way the dialogue was tweaked and adapted throughout in response to the actors and further inputs. It kind of stressed to me that while dialogue is massively important, you can develop a great deal of your script without fretting too much about it. You can think of it almost like the icing on the cake. It's often the best bit, but it doesn't go on until the very end of the baking process. And secondly, I mean, this is a masterclass on how to make a character that should be largely repulsive, but through remaining steadfast to his goals and a dry sense of humor, has become kind of an icon of horror cinema. And that, of course, is Jeffrey Combs' Herbert West.
Yeah, man. I mean, what he certainly is turning out. He's such a performance. It's ridiculous, isn't it? Yeah, so that's really great. I mean, I think what you said there as well is a great note for directors and how Gordon worked with his actors. It
Mm.
shows a great willingness to collaborate from him. And I think that's really, really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, for me, like reading this, I think was this idea of having a character do things when they're being introduced, which tells the audience who they are and what they're about. I mean, it's a classic kind of show, don't tell technique, but it's really prominent when you're reading this script. And it was really instructive, I thought. So
Mm.
that's
Good
certainly what
shout.
I'm
Yeah.
going to sort of be taking forward. Okay, bud. So I think we're almost done here. So before we wrap up and talk about our next episode, what would you rate the script and the film as here, Lee?
I think I'm going to go sevens across the board here. I mean, everything works really well, but to me, there's nothing particularly groundbreaking here. But, that's not to take anything away from either. It's just a really fun script and a really enjoyable film.
Yeah, man. To be honest, I totally agree. I mean, I thought the script was good fun, and I really enjoyed reading it. So I gave the script a 7. I also enjoyed the film and thought it was a lot of fun. Loads of ideas. It's bursting with energy. And I do love the kind of practical, kind of low budget, effects that we see in this kind of splattercore movie from the 80s and that sort of thing. So I gave the film a 7 as well.
Nice. So that gives us pretty much a unanimous score of 14 out of 20 for the script and 14 out of 20 for the film.
Yeah, man, we're in utter agreement, Lee.
Yeah,
How
we
about
are
that?
in sync. How cool is that?
Okay, man. So what's on the agenda for next time?
Next time, we will be taking our first foray into the world of TV with an in-depth look at the series premiere of the best horror show on TV today, Season 1, Episode 1 of From.
Oh, amazing, dude. So I haven't had a chance to watch this yet. So I'm really, really interested to take a look at this series and, dive into the script and see what we can learn from that as well. I think it's going to be awesome, dude.
It's going to be good, man. It's going to be a good one.
So if you enjoyed the podcast, please hit like and subscribe on your podcatcher of choice. And obviously go out and check out our socials as well. But until next time, do take care.
Remember, if it's dead, let it stay dead and keep on writing those scares.